Thank you for joining us. I am Drew Armstrong, the executive editor of Endpoints News, and welcome to Post Talk Live. Now, what China's biotech rise means for the US is still undecided. But I also think that the biotech community deserves a deeper debate about China biotech. We want to break the biotech debate into pieces, understand them, air out the disagreements, and let you hear from the most important voices. And to kick things off tonight, we're going to be talking about how China is changing the nature of innovation with Roivant CEO Matt Gline and Strand Therapeutics CEO and founder Jacob Becraft. So welcome to the stage, Matt. Jake, come on up. Well, I'm delighted to have both of you here because you're two of my favorite people to talk to. Both of you, I think, are engaging and sometimes contrarian conversationalists. Matt, you've been a voice, I think, for a while now on how biopharma works. You're always thoughtful about this industry. Jake, you got your start, I believe, in this, right around upstairs, I believe, and are a very kind of traditional biotech founder. Matt, I want to start with you. And I'm going to do it by asking you a little bit to explode some of the premise of tonight's event, which I think is always a good way to kick things off.
Thanks for having me.
Yes.
I want to start, you earlier, there's this famous New Yorker cover where it's like a picture of New York City and then there's like a river and then the rest of the world. And I enjoyed your introduction today because you equated 5 places: the United States, Europe, China, Cambridge, and San Francisco. And I thought that was fun.
In this room, I feel like that, that works. So
that's a great stage setting for this evening's debate about China.
You should always flatter your audience.
Yeah.
Listen, we've talked about this a little bit, you and I. I think China gets placed as a surrogate for a lot of what's happening in the broader field of biotech innovation. And I want to start this evening off with you asking, is there something that has fundamentally changed about biotech and about innovation over recent years that I think coincides with the rise of China, but maybe is not entirely related to it?
Yeah, look, I think you asked the question because you know that I have an opinion on it. I think there's a few different pieces of this discussion that kind of get lost in the conflation, and that a lot of things that are happening in the industry get called about China. I think one of them is just certain parts of the drug discovery chain that used to be really high value and important activities have become commoditized. And that includes things like antibody discovery against at least a bunch of targets, and it includes certain aspects of small molecule discovery. It certainly includes, and look, commoditized value chains, to be clear, manufacturing matters even in commodity goods scenarios, and the fact that we can't do it may matter, but certain parts of the manufacturing process that used to be really high value and important have now become commoditized. And it's true that China is currently a place where a lot of that stuff happens really well, but there are US AI companies like AbCellera and Absci and companies in other countries that can develop antibodies as well, and there are manufacturers in other countries, and there are small molecule discovery efforts that are doing different things. And I think some of the change that we're going to have to reckon with isn't, hey, somebody else is doing something that we used to do. It's that something that we used to find enormous value in is now cheap and easy, and we need to figure out where the balloon is going to get squeezed next and how our industry is going to change when a novel antibody against a novel target used to be an 8-year head start, and now it's maybe a 2-year head start, and that's just different. And it's going to be different whether we block innovation from China or not. The other thing I'll say, and this is a complicated comment, and I don't mean to express a view on drug pricing policy, but the single thing that is currently most protecting US access to medicine is the way we pay for drugs. Anywhere in the world where somebody invents a drug, whether it's China or Southeast Asia or Europe or anywhere else, the thing they want, the thing they dream of from the minute they are at the lab bench is developing that drug in US clinical trials for access to the US patient population, because that's where the money is. And so right now, anywhere in the world that a drug is invented, whether it's China or anywhere else, it's gonna come here. We may want to change that for policy reasons. That may be an important thing for us to change for policy reasons. But right now, more than any other thing that we have going for us, that is what gets us access to medicines fast.
All right, Jake, I want to ask you to take on kind of the first part of Matt's comments here. I mean, is there something fundamental about how we think about innovation that either has changed or needs to change?
So the way that I think about what's going on right now is to try to diagnose the problem first, right? The first thing that we should acknowledge as truth is that over the last, let's say, 15 years, much longer than this China topic has been a problem, the biotech industry and the drug development industry writ large has been sick, right?
What do you mean by it? Explain. Yeah.
So we are spending more and more money developing less and less innovative medicines in some cases. The cost of drug development is exploding, often by self-imposed regulations and efficiencies within the FDA. The cost of a first-in-human trial, the time to test a first-in-human trial in the United States over the past 20 years has exploded, both in time and in cost, and that has crushed us. And how have the macroeconomic factors coalesced around that? Well, we take in some cases, less innovative medicines forward. We cluster around de-risked targets. We do less innovative things as a way to hedge that risk because the risk is increasing in the amount of capital, the amount of time it takes. Now, in the last 5 years, China has wedged its industrial policy wedge directly into that inefficiency side. We know that this is part of a centrally planned, authoritarian-led industrial policy meant to destabilize foreign competitors. They've done this across multiple different industries. To deny whether or not that's happening is I think, the incorrect piece. But the question for us is, like, what do we need to do about it? We've lacked, I think, a cohesive industry leadership, and we see it with this issue right now. We're at one of the few times where there is bipartisan DC support in massive acceleration on policy and regulatory reforms that we have just frankly never seen. We are not a loved industry in Washington, D.C. among either side of the aisle.
Safe to say.
And we have an actual support of accelerationism, and we are losing and fumbling the moment of acceleration with a lot of various, is China a friend, is China a foe? China's point of this industrial policy is to destabilize us. And so what I want us to do is think about or egregiously nonstop hit everyone in DC about these acceleration reforms, because protectionism or no protectionism without acceleration is just a slow decline.
Matt, do you agree with that diagnosis? I mean, that the industry is as Jake says, sick. And I know, Jake, you've kind of talked about this, I think, some as kind of the financialization of the industry as well. Do you agree with that assessment, Matt?
Yeah, first of all, I have a superpower here, which is that I used to work in finance, which is maybe the only industry that is more hated than biotech. And so actually, this is easy for me.
You could go into politics.
That's true. That's true. It's the second most hated industry.
Or God help you, media.
Journalism, yeah. Look, first of all, I think ever better, right? I think there's certainly ways in which the U.S. biotech industry could be stronger, needs to be stronger. I think there's a lot of dumb dynamics in biotech around M&A and around the way that we obsequiously beg, Andrew, to big pharma companies for our future. And I think it would be much better as an ecosystem if we could figure out ways to build real companies that lasted and did this thing themselves rather than, again, living for that set of whims. And there's lots of regulatory things that could be better. I'm not here to debate that. I do think, if we were talking about hamburgers instead of medicine, and I like hamburgers, and it got expensive to buy hamburgers, and then somebody else figured out how to make hamburgers cheaper and wanted to ship us hamburgers so that we could eat more hamburgers, we wouldn't say, oh my God, we need more reform to block these hamburgers coming in. We'd say, great, I can get cheaper hamburgers now. And so I think there's something about this debate that is specific to medicine, where we're afraid of medicines from other places, but they're still getting studied here, they're still getting developed here. And so, yeah, look, I think one reasonable response to China can run clinical trials faster is we should be able to run clinical trials faster too. And I agree with that. We should be able to run clinical trials faster, but we should also just be excited that we can now get clinical data from China faster than we could get it before China allowed the trials to run quickly. Data is data, and we can use it to be better.
You have a microphone, Jake. You're allowed to. You don't need my permission.
I don't know. I've never agreed and then disagreed with someone faster in one statement. I think that, I do. I'm a huge fan of Matt and Roivant simply because I love seeing companies actually go out and try to build biotechnology companies. I don't think that it happens nearly enough. That we are at an exciting time where it looks like some companies are actually going out and being bold and making that transition. think about this as like, how do we play this forward 10 years? And how do we think about industrial capacity? I grew up in a Rust Belt town in central Illinois. You can go down the Illinois River right outside of Peoria, Illinois, where I grew up, and see the carcasses of a once great manufacturing nation, and the impoverishedness that my parents' house that they bought in 1990 still sells for about 20% more than they bought it for in that time. That economic decay is from the exact sort of prioritization of, well, if it's cheaper in China, shouldn't we go there? And now as the Trump administration and others in DC try to reindustrialize the country right now over an industrial capacity that we do not have, it is going to be incredibly expensive. It is going to be incredibly damaging. And we are, I believe, on this pathway, if we do not accelerate these pieces, it isn't us in-licensing drugs from China. It is China discovering, developing, bringing here, commercializing those drugs, full stop, where it becomes impossible to attract capital and build discovery organizations here in the United States. That's what I worry about on this timeline played forward. And then if you play it forward to something like COVID happens again, and we don't have an aggressively front-of-the-world early industrial discovery industrial base, then we are waiting for the Chinese company to build the COVID vaccine, and we wait at the back of the line once they're done vaccinating China. That's what I worry about. Now, the solution to it, I believe, is first and foremost, like, we should be accelerating across every single aspect. And it's insane to me to hear stories of like early Genzyme, early Genentech days of how they were able to test various things clinically. I'm not talking about being cavalier, but I'm talking about massive inefficiency cuts across the board. First of all, like, why can't we run Australia's first-in-human system here? That's just, they have 1/10 of our population. They run 4x the number of first-in-human clinical trials. So you can't tell me China's winning in clinical trials because they have 4x our population. Mm-hmm. We are just not prioritizing this.
What do you, I mean, regulatory reforms aside, what do both of you think need to be done? If we're talking about acceleration, what are the kind of 2 or 3 things that you would love to see happen? Obviously, FDA reform, I hear it over and over again. I don't think there's going to be a lot of disagreement around the room, though maybe the shape of what exactly it should look like. But Matt, what are the things that you think need to be done to kind of speed up our ability to do things here or in friendly countries?
I'm going to pander for a moment.
Please.
I think that my guess is area of common ground in this room is one of the things that made America great at this the first time around was the way that we encouraged the talent bench here, the way that we funded research, the way that we funded an institution and university system that was the best in the world or among the best in the world. And I do think that we have, because of hawkish global policy at some level, or at least because of a view on immigration that is popular in America right now, we've messed up that talent pipeline, but good. In part for immigration-related reasons, in part for reasons of the academy having lost popularity in other places. But anyway, I think that's bad. Yeah. I think if you're going to do like one policy thing to cement America's future, it would be to go and reinvest in that talent base and make sure that, look, if it's got to be different institutions to make the country work, make it different institutions. But we have to be funding research somewhere. We have to be the place in the world where everybody wants to do that work. And I think that was a huge industrial capacity thing for us that I worry intensely about losing. So I think that's certainly one of them.
I completely agree with that. I think everyone who's been in academia recently, and I was in academia in this building in the last 10 years, knows that the way that the NIH was funding research was very far from ideal. And the way that we are supporting people who are trying to go into fundamental research roles was not good. I think that, I know we're at MIT right now. I think the mandatory overhead that some research institutions take from our public funding is absolutely egregious, and I think that we needed reform. However, we waited too long to police ourselves, and then we got hit with
You can do it.
I said I wouldn't.
We put the happy hour at the start of the night for a reason.
we got hit with a buzzsaw on top of it, and part of, like, we do have to sort of like police ourselves. Like we should have been better about policing ourselves and making sure that like our institutions were robust at the same time. Like everyone from my PhD class here that graduated 7 years ago didn't go into academia because it was just like impossible to get NIH grants, and that was well before any of these cuts. I think at the same time, like, We've got to we have to change the FDA. We have to change our incentivizations. I do think that if we're going to accept clinical trial data from China, that the FDA has to hold them to the same sort of inspection standards that are happening here. And we've seen 2 stories in the last week that I think everyone who decided to pay $150 to come to this event or whatever it was probably read. That is scary shit and serious. If we care about patients, we care about patients everywhere.
Yeah, we're gonna just to make sure everybody knows what we're talking about. These are the, and thank you for those who were listening to the instructions to make noise. These are the two stories that have come out recently. We've had 2 deaths of pediatric patients that went undisclosed in gene therapy trials in China. Some great reporting by Science and our colleagues over at STAT to bring those to light. And I think everybody's probably read about that. But I just want to make sure everybody knows what you're talking about when you reference that.
Yeah, I figured if you paid $150 to come listen to us blabber about China, that you at least read the 2 stories. But yeah.
Well, let me. I do want to. I don't want to. I want to. We're going to talk about that tonight. That's definitely on the agenda. I have a big notepad full of questions that we're going to get into. But I want to go back to something that we started the panel with real quickly before we go there, which is, Matt, we talked about this idea that certain parts of innovation are a moat, are commoditized, or maybe kind of less distinct than they used to be. And Jake, you've talked about an accelerationism. So what does the frontier need to look like if we're going to say these things are more commoditized? These things, whether we like it or not, there are certain things that you can do that are just not quite the barrier that they used to be. If we're thinking about where does the future need to be and where does the frontier need to be, what's that have to look like? Is that a problem of ambition? Is that a problem of know-how? Where should it be?
I mean, look, I think, first of all, I think we owe it to ourselves, but also just like practically, we will be forced to retain the capacity for clinical trials because it turns out that's the end of all of these journeys, right? At the end of the day, you got to put patients in humans. You've got to do it here. You've got to do it in studies that the FDA will expect. I completely agree that data coming into the U.S. has to be held to the same standards wherever it's generated. That's absolutely true. And I think that's an area where we need to be great clinicians. We need to be great clinical scientists. In terms of other than that, look, I think that is, I'm sure, partially an industrial policy and industrial capacity question, but it's in part, and this is like an annoying glib comment, it's about the spirit of what it means to be an American. Why is it that Google is an American company and then also OpenAI is an American company and that GM and Ford were American companies? Why is it that for many, many decades, the first of every one of among the greatest innovations to have come out of whatever technology sector have come from here? I do think that is something that we should not take for granted, and it's something we've got to figure out how to bottle and do. But I don't think saying, well, the last one of those was antibody engineering, so therefore we need to crystallize antibody engineering and be the best antibody engineers forever because that's what worked last time. I don't think that's the answer. I think the answer is someone in this building's got to figure out what the next antibody engineering is, and we've got to get there before China does, if we want America to be the place that does that thing next. And again, I think there are almost certain, I'm very fortunate that I don't have to think a lot about global industrial capacity in my day job, so I don't. There's almost certainly things that we can do from a policy perspective, from an investment perspective, to figure that out. But again, I don't think putting up gates around antibody engineering is going to be the solution to that problem. It's just going to ossify us on some earlier generation of technology because we can.
Jake, I mean, do you argue this because I feel like you have kind of some dueling points on this.
I do completely agree. We have this incredible innovation ecosystem here in the United States, but we've seen, we see over the years our sector sort of tide comes in, tide goes out on biotech's investability, and there's this graph that tracks, the ROI of $1 invested in drug development has been falling and falling and falling, and it's approaching this point, or maybe it's even fallen below it, where the ROI on that dollar is less than the cost of capital. And at the top end of the world, capital doesn't have an allegiance to curing cancer, to building this. And so, we can train all these academics with NIH money, but if we don't have a functioning private system, we don't have another landing spot for most biologists to land in terms of an industrial capacity in the private sector outside of drugs. I believe that over this century of biology that we're about to see, there will be other areas, I hope, that we can commercialize biotechnology. But right now, it's what, 93% is the drug development industry of where those people will land. that has to exist if it vaporizes, because it becomes an uninvestable sector, because the new business model, I think in the words of an Endpoints article a few weeks ago, is large check, small team, Chinese asset, or whatever it was. Then,
you can thank Kyle as he's standing up back there for that one. Yeah.
Good job, Kyle. No, I mean, it's functionally true, and it's like, that's innovative, and those are good for patients, and we pay for medicines. So those drugs, whether they're in-licensed, put into a shell company here with a small executive team, or brought by the Chinese company, they do have to be here. The reason we're not talking about hamburgers here is because we're talking about food. Now, if I told you that China can sell us all of our food for cheaper, so we should buy from them, that creates an unbelievable amount of soft power in the event that they invade Taiwan. And we want to impose sanctions, and we don't have a supply anymore. Supply chains take a long time. I believe in America. That's why I believe we can accelerate. I believe that there is no reason that we have to outsource areas of our innovation ecosystem to other countries who are simply using centrally planned industrial policy to undercut a free market pricing dynamic. And it's an incredible country. China is an incredible nation of hardworking people. They do amazing work. Do they cut corners sometimes in certain industries? Absolutely. Do they cut corners in any of their clinical trials? I don't know. Maybe this is the only industry that they never cut corners in. I'm shocked. But like, it does like give us a kick in the ass. Like, this is the Sputnik moment for biotechnology. Be better or die. Yeah, that's great. Like, but let's fucking go. Sorry. Let's go. Like, seriously, like, let's go. We should be able to run clinical trials faster. We should be able to run them here in the United States. Clinical trials are a resource. If you've ever had a family member, especially in oncology, have to get into a first-in-human study, you don't get into it because things are going great in your life, and we don't run them at most places. Where I grew up, there are no clinical trials. Not a single one. 86% of non-metropolitan hospitals in the United States don't run them. So you grow up in Central Illinois, you get cancer, you're out of standard of care, where are you gonna go? You're gonna spend the last 3 months of your life in Pittsburgh so that you can have a shot at still living? Like, that's a travesty. That is sad. We can do better.
Are there...
Completely agree.
Are there things, Jake, I do want to ask you, I mean, the landscape of the American economy is filled with places where we have decided it does make sense to do things in other countries. Are there things that you think that the biotech industry should be willing to say, hey, it's okay to do this over here. It makes more sense. We will get drugs to patients faster or more cheaply if we outsource these things.
I am a big believer in cross-border collaboration, despite what I am saying here. I think that there's a giant difference between Japan and China. It is huge. And to act as if China's central policy plan is to be a collaborator at the longest sales, and not to usurp our companies, not just replace biotechnology companies, replace pharma companies within this ecosystem via manipulation of certain market dynamics because they have a top to bottom plan, would be ignorant of what they are doing. We can disagree about what we should do about it. That is fine, but I don't think we can be completely ignorant. Like, they put it out in a 5-year plan. They did this in electric vehicles, in rare earth minerals. Yes, rare earths and electric vehicles and drugs and biotechnology are two different things. But if you look at how the Europeans and the US automakers responded.
Yeah, we blocked Chinese electric vehicles, and now we have crappier electric vehicles and don't use them on our streets. Great, awesome. So we drive expensive electric cars when the rest of the world has cheaper, better electric cars. How are we winning because we've done that? Well, who in this room is better off because you can't buy a Chinese electric car right now? I'll tell you, if you haven't ridden in them, no one in this room is better off because you can't buy a Chinese electric car right now. Those electric cars are really good. They just are. They're better than our cars.
I would imagine the 100,000 people and their families at Volvo, Europe did not move to do this. They're covered in these cars, and their companies have cratered. Now, protectionism is not the solution. It is not.
Now make it cancer drugs and talk about how many American patients die because we didn't allow the cancer drugs here because they were electric cars instead of cancer drugs.
I never said to cut off Chinese drugs here, and they're coming here. This is the market. If they're going to, like, I think it'd be insane to deny the innovation that's coming. But if we don't have a industrial supply, a sovereign supply of the medicines if they're coming from Chinese companies. And if we don't have an industrial capacity to continue inventing medicines, then we lose an incredible amount of soft power to a country that is not a global collaborator when things get tough. And if you don't think that Taiwan is going to be an issue within the next decade, I don't know, talk to someone in the intelligence community.
We have several of them here, so. Yeah. All right, gentlemen, this has been a ton of fun. We are going to continue the conversation in a minute here. I want everybody to please give a very, very robust round of applause. Jacob Mack.